Christopher Morton, welcome to Life Science Success Podcast. It's great to have you here.
Thank you very much, Don. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, and thanks for joining me during bio. It's a busy time, with an awful lot going on. It's been at least nice weather and a great conference. What's it been like for you?
I think you've just described it. Very, very busy. This is our first time. We came over from Europe, I think it's the first time I'm in a life sciences conference here that is as busy as this is. So we're very excited to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you here, on the show with me as well. And I look forward to diving in, a little bit more on you as well as the company. Tell me a little bit about yourself.
Well, it's quite simple. I'm an aeronautical engineer by training. I studied in the UK, and I specialized after my degree in numerical optimization, mathematical modeling, which opens up the playground. For a few years, I was actually working in research, then for an American company, based in Detroit. So cross sectors, automotive, aerospace, renewables, and had a couple of companies. And then in 2013, Mariano and Guillaume, my two co-founders, we started to look at the application of modeling and simulation in the space of advanced multiphysics, complex problems. And when you look at this, the human body becomes a natural fit.
Mm-hmm.
And 2018, we decided to set up the company, and so I'm now the CEO of Elem Biotech, a startup dedicated to virtual human twins.
Yeah, it seems like that word virtual human twin has been around for a while. Can you tell me a little bit more about Elem and more specifically, what is the focus of what you're trying to deliver for life sciences?
So absolutely, our focus at LM is to build a platform for pharmaceuticals, medtechs, or CROs to test new therapeutics using virtual human models as opposed to animal models, and before they get into real human trials.
Now, it seems like there's a lot of people that are working on using AI to circumvent that process. How does what you're working on differ from like some of the AI models that people are using for drug development and things?
So AI is very powerful for everything that is related to data and data modeling and data science, but you need that data.
Mm-hmm.
There are aspects of human physiology that are not well represented by data. Sorry. So what we do in LM is we have an approach which is called a mechanistic approach. So we start from MRIs or CT scans. We rebuild an organ or a system in 3 dimension virtually, so in the computer. We then apply all the biological properties of that system, so the expression of the cell behavior, the case of the heart, which is one of our main focus, the muscle, and we then solve a whole bunch of equations to effectively replicate the physiological function in the organ in 3 dimensions.
So let me make it a little bit more personal. What I'm hearing you say is that you're not just taking like a general approach of this is how you think that things would play out. You're actually recreating Don Davis's or Christopher Morton's heart. Is that
That is our aim.
okay?
Our aim is to be able to get to the point where we can support precision medicine. We are actually moving quite fast in that direction. But the health space is a very complex ecosystem, and the first challenge is to build trust and to deliver evidence that to back your solution. So we decided to really approach the problem from the trial side. So effectively generating large populations that are not specific individuals but representative of different patient groups. And we use these to deliver statistical information to help decision making when it comes to whether you progress, for example, from a preclinical to clinical trial with a molecule. So it's building supporting evidence, helping decision making, reducing animal trials at a population level. With all of this, the objective is that we actually see materialize is people are getting more used to having results from virtual human twin models. They start to understand what the potential and what the limitations are. They see how they can start to integrate it in their drug development process or in device testing schemes. And little by little, then they ask, can you do more? And that more is when you really start to calibrate virtual models to specific individuals. So we have a couple of cases of this, and that's the first step. So you take a specific patient MRI, we reconstruct that person's heart, then we calibrate it so that the electrocardiogram is the same that the patient has. We calibrate it so that the functional markers, so the capacity of the heart to pump blood into the body, is the same, and then we start to apply potential treatments. So what happens if you give a specific drug to that person? What will be the impact on these markers? Or in cases of mechanical pacing, for example, how should you pace that heart if the person has any sort of cardiac function restriction? And how much of the function can you recover?
Sounds to me also like there would be on the medical device side. I would imagine that there's probably a million applications in terms of this. I mean, just to take our heart as an example, in terms of valve replacements and things like that. This is essentially the change that you could expect if this is done this way. I would imagine that would be the future, but potentially.
I think there's so many things. It's also interesting. Initially, when we started LM, people asked us, "Do you do pharmas or medtechs?" And at the beginning, I was sort of phased out by this question, until I found, I think, what is the appropriate answer, which is how many hearts do we have?
Right, right.
So whether we have something that needs to be treated via any type of medicine, or with the assistance of a device, the underlying organ is the one and the same.
Yeah.
So when we create those models, and that's one of the specificities of the virtual human twin or the digital twin, is that you have to be very precise about the context of use and the questions of interest that you have. So for the pharma industry in cardiac safety, when we do virtual trials, the idea is to see what is the impact of the molecule on the electrocardiogram. Can it induce a proarrhythmic undesired effect? So this is one very specific context of use. When we look at devices, one question could be, there's a valve that is leaking.
Sure.
How can I replace that valve? What model of artificial valve would work better for that patient? So those are different questions with different objectives, and they require a different level of modeling depending what you want to do.
Yeah. I mean, and it's interesting to me to think about this coming together. My understanding is that, I mean, this isn't something that you're running locally either. That you're having to use supercomputing to be able to pull all of these calculations together. Tell me a little bit more about that.
We use supercomputers. So one of the aspects, when I explained earlier that we solve a whole bunch of mathematical equations, I think we're in the hundreds of millions of equations that we solve at the same time to compute the cardiac response. So you do need supercomputers. One of the specificities of LM is that we develop the technology that we use to replicate the organ function on a supercomputer. So our development platform is a supercomputer. Until very recently, it was called Mare Nostrum 4, which was quite special because it was the only supercomputer in a chapel.
Oh wow.
So it's in Barcelona. It's actually very beautiful. It's yeah, there are pictures all over the internet because it is really truly amazing. And it was also featured actually together with a reference to what we do by Dan Brown in the book Origin
Right.
in 2018.
Yeah,
So
I remember in that book, there's the computer has a voice. I don't remember the name of the Jarvis type character. If you were to associate it with Marvel Comics, but essentially, it answers a lot of things for the main character in the book, and yeah, it's massive inside of this place, and so yeah.
so I think it's like, wouldn't put my head more against it, but I believe it's on page 161
Okay.
that there is the reference to Mare Nostrum supercomputer, to Alia Red, which is our simulation software, and to the virtual beating heart in the computer, which is a reference to what we do at Elem.
Perfect. Yeah, that's
So,
great.
and sorry, just to get back on the
Sure.
question regarding supercomputers, you had to have supercomputer centers until now to be able to offer a service or to deploy platforms like ours for others to use, for industry to use. With the expansion of data centers, companies like AWS, Oracle, Microsoft that put compute capability in the cloud, then this is a resource that is now available to all. So what we do at LM is we develop on our supercomputer, and then we have encapsulated the virtual population databases, the application to parameterize the drugs, dosages, and so on and so forth in the cloud. So a user, somebody working in the pharma industry or device would basically log into our portal and they would select the population they want to analyze, specify the parameters of the medicine, so how it affects the ion channels, which is something they obtained from the early in vitro testing phases. They press play, it distributes the trial in a supercomputer in the cloud, and then they get the results to do the analysis of safety and whatever they want to do.
Perfect. Yeah, yeah. It sounds almost so futuristic, but it's now, right? And I guess when companies come to you, so let's maybe take both examples because we know that people either on either side, and this kind of goes back to the overall, themes a lot of times inside of life sciences. When you're a drug company, you're a drug company, and you only sort of focus on the drug company elements of things, and you only think about the diagnostic or the medical device side whenever it actually could impact whatever your drug is doing. And so maybe we'll start with a pharma company. So if I were developing a drug and I wanted something like your model, when would I come to you? What would that look like?
So if you're a pharma company, I would say in any case as soon as you can. What does that mean? We start to be able to model from the moment the molecule has been characterized. We deal primarily with small molecules. So one of the tests that is done in a lab is to assess how that chemical compound will affect one or more of the ion channels of the cardiac cells. If I say ion channels, it may be complicated for many people, but actually it's very easy. If I tell you potassium, sodium, calcium,
Sure.
it's everybody knows what this is. Okay,
Right.
so the cardiac cells have sort of little gates, and they let some calcium, some potassium, some sodium go through, the cell membrane, and that is what then enable to diffuse the electricity within the heart and have the contraction. So chemical drugs, what they tend to do is they block partially or totally some of these gates, and by doing so, they reduce not necessarily the capacity to pump directly, but they slow it down.
Sure.
And the heart, the cells are like little capacitors, so
Right.
they have to reload,
Right.
so they can beat again. And because it takes longer to charge, then your heart starts to beat, at half capacity. And so that's one of the really undesired effect. And if depending on how bad that impact of the drug is, you will have, tachycardias, torsade de pointe, which is very, severe. So loads of different types of undesired effect, undesired arrhythmias. So from the moment the company has gotten to the point where they have the understanding of how the molecule is impacting those channels, they can start to use our solution.
Very good.
So it's at the end of the lab testing phase, so at the end of in vitro. And we also need some plasma binding, which is again around that stage, which is how much of the medicine or what quantity is going to be absorbed by the body and how much is freely navigating through it.
Yeah.
So once we have these two things, they can start to use it. So it's to also say it differently. So when you complete the in vitro phase, you start the in vivo phase.
Right.
And the in vivo phase has a long campaign of animal testing and then human testing. If they want to have some quick understanding of the possible effect on humans, that is a great time to start.
Good. Okay. And then what they will get from it, my understanding is more clarity in terms of the impact across the population. They also may be able to adjust some things or correct some things so that that same impact may or may not be emphasized, right? Whatever they're trying to target.
In the early stages of in vivo, so when they have animal testing, usually you have to take into account the cost element of things. So they would not necessarily do a full-blown test on a large virtual population. So what you get is an early indication of the level of risk that your molecule can carry.
Okay.
It's only one aspect. When they do animal testing, they look at neurological impact, they look at potential impairment of respiration. So you have some vital functions that we cannot cover. So they still need to do some of these, but at least on the cardiac safety side, they would have a pretty good indication if they have to rework, if they have to drop the molecule, or if they can go forward. When we then go into the later stage of preclinical and we start to look at clinical stages, so in human analysis, then it's about diversity. So can we push and understand what are safe dosages in different populations? Women and men have a different response to drugs.
For sure.
Okay. At the moment, you have a massive bias in trials towards male populations, or male individuals. It took me a while, but I now know why. So it's not only because the male is the world is sexist. I mean, of course, that is a part of it. But primarily, when you run trials, what you look for is certainty. With the menstrual cycle, you have an
More
extra
uncertainty.
degree of uncertainty.
Ah.
And so it's an extra variable that you have to deal with. So this is something that, when you try to replicate assays, when you replicate trials and you try to show that your product is going to be safe or is going to give you the efficacy that you want, this additional variability is actually a nightmare to deal with.
Sure. Okay.
However, half of the world, half of the
Right.
population, are women, and I think it is important to address this. Virtually, we can take into account the different type of sexes. So we have female population, we have male populations, and we can also introduce, for example, hormonal variability that will come with the different stages of the menstrual cycle.
Interesting.
So if a company really wanted to address this matter, they could do it virtually before they even do it in real candidates.
Amazing.
So it becomes a help to design your trial. How should you select your candidates? What pockets of population should you avoid because the response is not going to be right? Can you perhaps change your go-to-market strategy? Instead of trying to do one size fit all to start with? Well, you start to place the treatment for specific conditions for specific patients, and then over time you start to expand until you actually know that is going to be safe all around. So once you enter into these clinical trial design stages with the support of virtual populations, you can explore many things that are not available today.
Yeah, also very interesting. I do want to talk about medical devices because I think it's
Sure.
an important area as well. I would imagine a lot of these same things apply, but just describe for me what types of medical device companies would come to you, and then again, what does that look like?
So, yes, and you're absolutely right. So it applies to both, and we've been quite lucky, I would say, or quite blessed that today on the pharma side we have a partnership with Boehringer Ingelheim. So they're working with us to work on the pharma solution as well, and on the device side, we've had also a long relationship with Medtronic. And so with Medtronic, the aspects that we started to look at were pacemakers. So in the case of pacemakers, the questions become, where do you place the pacemaker? You have nowadays, I believe it's 12 or 14 different types of mechanical pacing. Endocardial, myocardial, epicardial, His bundle pacing, selective His, non-selective. You have different type of pacing strategies. Which one is the best for the patient?
Right, right,
Usually, the surgeon has one go at this.
right.
The moment we can replicate that person's heart, the pathology that they have, then we can start to test all these different pacing configurations and say, look, for that patient, perhaps this is the best option. Or we could start also to see, we can visualize what isn't working. The heart remodels. The human body is fantastic.
Sure.
We adapt to any deficiency that we have
Right, right.
until the ultimate one, where at one point it says stop. Okay,
Yeah.
but during our life, a lifetime, the body adapts, and so if you have issues, whether it's of an electrical type or a, tissue problem in your heart, your heart it's a muscle,
Sure.
and it will adapt.
Right.
It will adapt. Okay, so if part of the heart is not beating because you've had an infarction, so you have effectively a scar where blood isn't going, of course it's not going to pump right.
Right.
The pump is not going to operate right. So it will adapt. So some parts of the heart will become thicker to compensate. It will beat a bit harder. Lots of things that happen. So it does this. When you have hypertension, it also, your heart has to pump harder to compensate for the additional force
Right.
that it has to apply to push the blood into your body. So there too, the muscle will develop. The tension in the muscle, the stresses in the muscle, the work that the heart is doing is not something that can be measured in a real patient.
Right.
But with the mechanistic models that we have, it is integral to this because we model the cells, but we also model the fibers and the mechanical properties. So we can give that information to the device makers, to the doctors, and so they can start to see, okay, if we change the pacing strategy, for example,
Right.
perhaps we can limit the negative impact. And in case of pacemakers, you have over 30% of what they call non-responders.
Oh, wow.
So those are people who get a pacemaker implant,
Right.
but when it's supposed to work, it doesn't. And it's not that the device doesn't work.
Sure.
It usually is because something has changed.
Right. Right.
Okay. So being able to anticipate these things, hopefully we can reduce the number of non-responders, or even at one point help sorry, not companies, but help doctors decide whether it is worth taking the risk, or,
Right.
or exposing the patient to the risk of a surgery
Yeah.
if you know that this is not going to work.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's one case of devices, but you mentioned valves earlier. So
Right.
leakages, how bad is it? Anything really.
Yeah. So just to wrap up, what are you hoping to get out of bio while you're here? What's the biggest thing that you're looking for while you're here?
For us, coming to bio is an opportunity really to liaise with as many uh, pharmaceutical companies as we can, to meet CROs, to meet medtechs, to really understand what the problems are, to get them to know what we do as well. Look for opportunities to partner, and just basically plant this flag and say, look, virtual humans for medical testing are a real thing. They're available today, and we're ready to go.
Very good. Well, Christopher Morton, thank you so much for being on the Life Science Success Podcast. I really appreciated getting to talk to you and getting to hear about what you're working on with the limb. And I wish you a good conference. And hopefully somebody that's listening to this or watching it, that they're thinking of ways that they can use a limb in the things that they're developing as well. So thanks a lot for being on.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for having me. It's a real pleasure. And it's amazing to be in the US and to be with all these people at the same time.